I was exhausted when I checked into the hotel. It was one of those boutique places, the kind with dim lighting and mismatched vintage furniture that's supposed to feel charming but mostly just feels old. I'd been driving for hours, halfway through a solo road trip that I'd planned on a whim to clear my head. The receptionist was a woman in her 50s with heavy eyeliner and a pinched expression, like she'd been stuck behind that desk too long. When she handed me my room key, a real key, not one of those plastic cards, I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked underneath. She didn't explain it, just nodded toward the elevator with a tired smile. As I rode up, I unfolded the note, expecting Wi-Fi info or something. Instead, in small, slanted handwriting, it said, "If you hear someone crying in the hallway, do not open your door." I laughed a little, figuring it was some kind of weird hotel gimmick, but the emptiness of the corridor when I stepped out made me glance back at the elevator, half expecting the receptionist to be watching. That first night was uneventful. My room was small but clean, with dark floral wallpaper and a window overlooking the parking lot. I fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the hum of the heater. But the next night, just past 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of soft crying. It was faint but unmistakable, a woman's voice, muffled like she was pressed against the other side of the door. For a few minutes, I lay there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was a guest in another room, or maybe the pipes groaning. But then the crying stopped suddenly, cut off like someone had slapped a hand over her mouth. I didn't move until dawn, barely breathing, ears straining for any sound. When I finally gathered the courage to check the peephole, the hallway was empty, dimly lit by the flickering sconce above my door. The following morning, I went downstairs, half expecting to see other guests whispering about strange noises, but the lobby was quiet. The receptionist barely glanced at me when I handed over my key to ask for fresh towels. I hesitated, then cleared my throat and said, trying to sound casual, "Is there someone else on my floor?" I thought I heard. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and dark. "You should keep your door locked at night," she said, cutting me off. "Sometimes sound carries in old buildings." Then she turned away, leaving me standing there, the question shriveling on my tongue. Back in my room, I threw the note in the trash and tried to shake off the unease. I reminded myself that old hotels had quirks, creaking pipes, thin walls. That evening, I left the TV on volume low and tried to ignore how the shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch longer than they should. The third night, the crying came back, softer this time, almost hesitant. I buried myself under the blankets, fingers clenched so tight around the edge that my knuckles ached. Minutes passed, maybe an hour, I lost track. But then I realized something that turned my blood cold. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was inside the room. A slow, wet inhale, like someone trying to catch their breath between sobs, came from the corner near the wardrobe. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but the air felt heavy, wrong, carrying the faint scent of something sour, like damp fabric. I squeezed my eyes shut, every instinct screaming not to look, not to move. But the crying grew louder, raw, and ragged, and I felt the mattress dip, as if someone had pressed a hand into it. I couldn't breathe. Every nerve in my body locked up, terror holding me down like a weight. The crying was so close now, desperate and broken, each sob shuddering through the dark. I wanted to bolt, to fling myself at the door and run, but my limbs wouldn't obey. All I could do was lie there, muscles cramped with fear, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Then, as suddenly as it started, the sobbing stopped. The silence that followed was even worse, thick, and unnatural, pressing against my ears. For a long time, I didn't move, barely blinked, listening for any shift, any whisper of sound. When I finally dared to open my eyes wider, the room was empty. The air felt lighter, that sour smell fading as if it had never been there. I stayed awake until morning, every shadow creeping over the wallpaper making me flinch. At dawn, I threw my things into my bag with shaking hands, not caring if I left anything behind. The receptionist watched me from behind the desk as I hurried across the lobby, eyes dark and unreadable. I stopped just long enough to shove my room key toward her, voice cracking as I asked, "What the hell happened here?" For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she sighed, shoulders sagging like someone too tired to keep up the act. "You weren't supposed to open the door," she said softly. "That's the only rule." My mouth went dry. "I didn't," I snapped, but even as I said it, my mind flashed back to the night before, the faint memory of a click, my fingers brushing the lock in a half-asleep daze, the door left just barely ajar. The receptionist only shook her head, gaze sliding to the stained glass window behind me, and I didn't wait to hear more. I stumbled outside into the daylight, lungs heaving like I'd been underwater for hours. I drove for nearly an hour before I pulled over at a gas station, hands still trembling on the wheel. The sun was high, warm through the windshield, but I couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I kept replaying the night over and over, the crying, the dip in the mattress, the receptionist's words. My fingers brushed against my phone in the cup holder, and before I could second-guess it, I was searching for anything about the hotel. Buried between reviews about the quirky decor and the bad coffee, I found a local news article from years ago, a woman who had died there, alone and undiscovered for days. The details were sparse, but the date matched the faded calendar I'd seen behind the front desk, stuck on the same month and year. The article mentioned complaints from guests who heard crying late at night, some even claiming to see her reflection in the hallway mirrors, eyes wide and pleading. I nearly dropped my phone, heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I knew I should just keep driving, put as much distance as I could between me and that place, but something made me pause. Maybe it was guilt, or the way the receptionist's warning kept echoing in my head. Against my better judgment, I dialed the hotel's number. It rang twice before she answered, her voice flat and unsurprised, like she'd been expecting my call. I blurted out a jumbled apology, questions spilling over each other. Who was she? What did she want? Why me? The line crackled, and for a moment, I thought it had gone dead. But then the receptionist sighed, long and weary. "She's just lonely," she said, almost gentle. "She knocks, she cries. She just wants someone to let her in." A cold shiver prickled down my spine, the words twisting deep into my gut. Before I could respond, the line clicked dead, leaving me alone in the silence of the car, the sun dimming behind a bank of clouds. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows stretching in the corners of my motel room, heard that ragged sobbing echoing in my ears. By morning, my eyes were raw, head pounding from exhaustion, but the worst part was the guilt curling in my gut. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the mattress had dipped, the way the crying had shifted from the hallway to inside my room, like she'd gotten in somehow, like I'd let her in. I knew it was crazy, knew I should just drive on, try to forget. But by noon, I found myself parked outside a library in the next town over, scrolling through microfilm archives and newspaper clippings with shaky fingers. I needed to know who she was, why she was still there, why me. After hours of digging, I found a photo of the woman, eyes dark and soft, face half-shadowed in black and white grain. Her name was Lillian Hart, a pianist who'd lived in town decades ago, found dead in that room. No family to claim her, no funeral notice. Just a single line, body discovered after multiple noise complaints from other guests. I left the library with the sun sinking low, sky bruising purple and gray. My throat was dry, pulse jumping at every gust of wind. I told myself I was done, that I'd found what I came for, that it was over. But the guilt stayed, heavy as stones in my stomach. I kept thinking about that note at check-in, the way the receptionist's eyes had slid away when I mentioned the crying. The way Lillian must have waited night after night, locked in that room with no one to hear her. It felt wrong to just leave, to pretend it hadn't happened. Before I could stop myself, I pulled into a parking lot and stared at the hotel's number glowing on my phone screen, thumb hovering over the call button. I just wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe just to prove to myself that it was real, that I hadn't imagined it all. But before I could press it, a new notification flashed across my screen, an email from the hotel confirming my stay. Except there was a second attachment, a photo. My heart stuttered as I opened it, throat closing tight. It was dark, grainy, but I recognized the floral wallpaper, the outline of the bed, my room. And in the corner, barely visible, was the silhouette of a woman, head bowed, hair falling forward to hide her face. I dropped my phone like it burned, breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of sick joke, maybe a glitch or a spam email, but the timestamp was from just a few minutes ago. Hands trembling, I picked the phone back up, forcing myself to stare at the photo again. The woman's silhouette was faint but unmistakable, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, like her neck couldn't quite support the weight. The longer I stared, the more details I noticed: her bare feet just visible against the dark carpet, the way her fingers hung limp and pale at her sides. But the worst part was the door. It was open, just a crack, shadow spilling in from the hallway. A detail I was sure I'd never seen, never left that way. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but all I could think of was the note, that single warning, "Do not open your door." But I was sure of it, unless my breath hitched, cold panic lacing my spine. Unless she had. I don't remember much about getting back on the road, just that I drove until the sky bled black, headlights carving tunnels through the dark. I didn't stop, didn't check my mirrors, afraid of what I might see. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, terrified it would be another email, another photo. The miles blurred together, and all I could hear was that muffled sobbing, The receptionist's voice echoing over and over, she just wants someone to let her in. I kept driving until sunrise, until the gas light blinked angry red, and only then did I pull into a rest stop, hands aching from gripping the wheel. I wanted to believe it was over, that I'd left her behind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with me, lingering in the rearview mirror. When I finally dared to look, eyes raw with exhaustion, the back seat was empty. But my reflection, pale and hollow-eyed, seemed almost unfamiliar, like someone else was looking back. I stared until my vision blurred, until all I could see were dark eyes and shadows stretching too far. I spent the next few nights in different motels, never staying more than one night in the same place. Sleep came in fits, shallow and dreamless, my nerves frayed to the edge. Every creak of the walls, every hum of the air conditioner sent my pulse skittering. I left the TV on low, light pooling against the peeling wallpaper, but darkness seemed to gather in the corners anyway. I kept my phone off, terrified of seeing another email, another photo. But it didn't help. The third night, just past 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of soft crying. It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but I knew that voice knew it, like a splinter beneath the skin. My whole body went cold, fingers stiff where they clutched the blankets. It was impossible. I'd left that place behind miles and miles ago. But the sobbing went on, muffled and broken, creeping closer. This time, I didn't wait. I stumbled out of bed, heart slamming against my ribs, and bolted for the door, fingers fumbling with the lock. The crying sharpened, raw and desperate, and for one wild second, I almost flung the door open. But then I froze, remembering the note, the warning. I didn't open it. Not that night, not the next. I kept driving, eyes gritty with exhaustion, only stopping for gas and bad diner coffee. But the crying followed me, soft at first, then louder always past 2 a.m., always from somewhere too close. I taped the motel door shut, left the lights blazing, even stuffed towels beneath the crack, but nothing stopped it. The worst part was that every time I heard it, it seemed a little nearer, like she was learning the way in. I haven't slept in days. Haven't seen another email, but sometimes when I check my phone, I catch the screen flickering, dark shapes twisting in the reflection. I don't know what she wants or why she picked me. Maybe it was the door left ajar, maybe just bad luck. But I keep driving, keep moving, because all I know is this: if I stop, if I stay in one place too long, I'm afraid I'll hear that sobbing again. Or worse, that I'll open the door this time and see who's been waiting on the other side.